What happens when one of Britain's most respected actresses walks into what should be a friendly morning chat show, only to face a barrage of disrespectful questions that cross every line imaginable? In just 39 seconds of tense exchanges, a television legend would be pushed to her absolute breaking point, forced to do something she had never done before on live television: walk off set in the middle of an interview, leaving a stunned host and a shocked studio audience in complete silence. The morning started like any other episode. Helen Mirren arrived at the studio looking elegant and composed, ready to discuss her latest theater project. She had done hundreds of interviews over her decades-long career, always gracious, always professional, always willing to share insights about her craft. But what was about to unfold would become one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. As Helen settled into her seat on the brightly lit set, Lorraine Kelly sat across from her with two other panelists, journalist Marcus Webb and lifestyle contributor Sandra Chen, flanking the host on either side. The cameras rolled, the audience applauded, and everything seemed normal at first. "Welcome, welcome," Lorraine said with her signature smile, but there was something in her tone that felt off, almost condescending. "So lovely to have someone of your vintage joining us this morning." Helen's expression flickered for just a moment. The word vintage hung in the air uncomfortably. She smiled politely, choosing to ignore the subtle dig. "Thank you for having me. Now," Lorraine continued, shuffling her notes dramatically, "I have to say, and I think our audience will agree, we're all wondering at what point does an actress of a certain age need to consider, how do I put this delicately, stepping aside for younger talent?" The studio went quiet. Marcus and Sandra shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. Helen sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Helen asked, her voice measured but firm. "Well, you know what I mean," Lorraine said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "The industry is changing. Fresh faces, new energy. Surely you must feel a bit out of place sometimes?" Helen took a slow breath. "I've been working in this industry for over 50 years. I've earned my place." "Oh, of course," Lorraine replied, but her tone suggested she didn't mean it at all. "But darling, let's be honest. How many roles are really written for women your age? Aren't you just clinging on at this point?" Sandra Chen interjected nervously. "Lorraine, I think what Helen's work demonstrates is that talent is timeless and—" "Sandra, please," Lorraine cut her off sharply. "I'm conducting an interview here. Helen doesn't need you to defend her. She's a big girl." She turned back to Helen. "Or should I say, a woman of a certain maturity." The audience was completely silent now. The atmosphere had turned toxic. Helen's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure with the grace of someone who had dealt with difficult situations before. "I think," Helen said carefully, "that what you're suggesting is not only insulting to me, but to every woman who continues to work and excel in her field regardless of age." Lorraine leaned back in her chair, a smug expression crossing her face. "Oh, here we go. The feminist speech. Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. At some point, don't you think it's a bit desperate? All these older actresses trying to stay relevant?" Marcus Webb looked horrified. "Lorraine, that's completely inappropriate. Helen Mirren is one of the most celebrated—" "Marcus, honestly," Lorraine snapped. "Nobody asked for your opinion either. This is my show." She turned back to Helen. "Tell me, do you ever look in the mirror and think, maybe it's time to just retire? Enjoy your pension? Let someone younger have a go?" Helen's composure was remarkable, but her eyes had turned ice cold. "What I think," she said slowly, "is that you're revealing far more about your own insecurities than anything about me." Lorraine's face flushed red. "Excuse me? My insecurities? I'm not the one desperately clinging to a career that's clearly past its prime." "This is unbelievable," Sandra muttered, shaking her head. You know what your problem is? Lorraine continued, her voice rising. You're from a generation that doesn't know when to quit. You take up space that could go to talented young actresses who actually have something fresh to offer. But no, you just keep going, collecting awards for playing grandmothers and queens, thinking you're still relevant. The audience gasped audibly. Several people looked genuinely shocked at what they were witnessing. This wasn't playful banter or challenging journalism. This was a personal attack, broadcast live. Helen remained calm, but her voice carried a weight of authority that filled the entire studio. I've worked with hundreds of interviewers throughout my career. Journalists who challenge, who probe, who ask difficult questions. That's their job, and I respect that. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's cruelty disguised as entertainment. Oh, please, Lorraine scoffed. Don't be so dramatic. I'm just asking the questions our viewers want answered. You're just upset because someone's finally being honest with you, instead of blowing smoke up your... Lorraine, Marcus interrupted, standing up slightly from his seat. This has gone way too far. You need to apologize. I'll do no such thing, Lorraine shot back. Sit down, Marcus. And Helen, if you can't handle a few honest observations, maybe you really are too fragile for this industry. Sandra leaned forward, her voice pleading. Can we please move on to discussing Helen's new play? This is supposed to be about her work, not... Her work? Lorraine laughed coldly. You mean the play that's probably only getting attention because of her name? Because let's face it, the actual performances from someone her age can't be what they used to be. That was the moment. Helen Mirren, who had sat through the entire tirade with remarkable patience, slowly removed the small microphone clipped to her jacket. The action was deliberate, controlled, powerful. She placed it carefully on the table in front of her. What are you doing? Lorraine asked, suddenly looking less confident. Helen stood up, smoothing down her outfit with dignity. I'm doing something I've never had to do in over 5 decades of professional work. I'm walking away from an interview because the person conducting it has absolutely no respect for me, for her other guests, or apparently for herself. You can't just leave, Lorraine sputtered, her face turning even redder. We're live. You signed a contract. Watch me, Helen replied simply. Marcus stood up as well. Helen, I'm so sorry. This isn't what any of us expected. Sandra nodded vigorously. You have every right to leave. This has been appalling. Lorraine's voice turned shrill. Oh, fantastic. Now you're both turning on me? On my own show? This is betrayal. Helen turned to face Lorraine one final time. You know what the saddest part of all this is? You have a platform. You have viewers who trust you, and you chose to use it to tear down someone who came here in good faith. That says everything about who you are and nothing about who I am. Don't you dare lecture me, Lorraine hissed. I made this show. I built this career. Who do you think you are, coming onto my set and acting superior? I'm not acting superior, Helen said quietly. I simply expect basic respect, which apparently is too much to ask. The studio audience started to applaud. It began with one person, then another, and within seconds, nearly the entire audience was clapping for Helen. Some were even standing. The sound filled the studio, drowning out whatever Lorraine was trying to say. Lorraine looked around in shock and fury. Stop that! Stop clapping! This is my show! My show! But the applause only grew louder. Helen gave a slight nod to the audience, acknowledging their support with grace, and began walking toward the exit at the side of the stage. You're making a huge mistake, Lorraine shouted after her. You'll never work with this network again. Do you hear me? Helen didn't turn around. She simply kept walking, her posture perfect, her dignity intact. Sandra stood up and called out, Helen, wait! But Helen was already gone, the studio door closing behind her, with a soft click that somehow felt louder than any of Lorraine's shouting. The applause finally died down, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the studio. Lorraine sat in her chair, her face a mixture of anger and confusion, as if she couldn't quite comprehend what had just happened. Marcus looked directly at the camera. "I think we need to take a commercial break." "No," Lorraine snapped. "We're not taking a break. We're going to continue the show as planned." "Lorraine," Sandra said gently, "maybe we should just—" "I said we're continuing." Lorraine's voice cracked slightly. She turned to the audience, trying to regain control. "Well, that was certainly dramatic, wasn't it? Some people just can't handle honest conversation." The audience remained silent. No one laughed. No one agreed. No one seemed to be on her side. A few people near the front were shaking their heads in disapproval. Lorraine shuffled her papers frantically. "Right. Well, we still have more show to do. Marcus, Sandra, let's talk about—" She trailed off, seemingly unable to focus. Marcus spoke up, his voice firm. "I think we need to address what just happened. That was completely unacceptable." "Unacceptable?" Lorraine's eyes flashed. "She walked off my show. She embarrassed me on live television." "You embarrassed yourself," Sandra said quietly but clearly. "Everything you said to her was cruel and unprofessional." "How dare you?" Lorraine whispered, her voice dangerous. "Both of you. After everything I've done for you, giving you spots on this show, and this is how you repay me?" "Repay you?" Marcus looked incredulous. "Lorraine, we're supposed to be colleagues, panelists, but you just spent the last several minutes verbally attacking one of the most respected actresses in the world for absolutely no reason." "I was asking tough questions," Lorraine insisted. "That's what good interviewers do." "No," Sandra shook her head. "Good interviewers ask challenging questions about work, about choices, about perspectives. They don't make personal attacks about age and relevance. They don't demean their guests." Lorraine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You know what? If you both feel that way, maybe you should leave too. Go on. Follow your precious Helen Mirren." Marcus and Sandra looked at each other. There was a long, tense moment where no one spoke. Then Marcus stood up, carefully removed his microphone, and placed it on the table, exactly as Helen had done. "You're right," he said. "I think I will." Sandra followed suit, standing and removing her microphone. "I'm not going to sit here and pretend that what happened was okay." "Traitors!" Lorraine shrieked. "Both of you! You'll never work in this industry again. I have connections. I have power." But Marcus and Sandra were already walking off the set, following the same path Helen had taken moments before. The audience, watching all of this unfold, sat in stunned silence. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked satisfied, as if justice was being served. Lorraine stood alone on the stage, surrounded by empty chairs and abandoned microphones. She looked out at the audience, then at the cameras, clearly struggling to find words. "This is ridiculous," she finally said, her voice shaking. "All of this over a few questions. People are so sensitive these days. Can't handle a little criticism." Someone in the audience called out, "It wasn't criticism, it was cruel." Lorraine spun around, trying to identify who had spoken. "Who said that? Who said that?" But no one answered. The audience just stared at her, and in that moment, the reality of what had happened seemed to finally sink in. She had pushed too far, said too much, and lost not just her guest, but her entire panel. A producer's voice could be heard faintly off camera, probably through an earpiece. Lorraine touched her ear, listening, and her face went pale. "We're going to commercial," she said flatly, all the fight suddenly gone from her voice. "When we come back, we'll have different guests." But everyone watching knew that things would never be the same. The damage was done, and it had all been broadcast live for everyone to see. As the studio lights dimmed for the commercial break, Lorraine remained standing there, alone in the middle of the stage, surrounded by empty chairs and the weight of her own words. The audience began to murmur among themselves, their voices a low hum of shock and disapproval. One woman near the front stood up and started walking toward the exit. Then another person followed, and another. Within moments, nearly a third of the audience was leaving, unable to stomach staying for the rest of the show. Lorraine watched them go, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something, to call them back, to explain herself. But no words came. For perhaps the first time in her career, she was completely speechless. A stage manager approached her cautiously. "Lorraine, we need to discuss how to proceed with the rest of the show." "Get away from me," Lorraine said, but her voice lacked its earlier venom. She sounded tired, defeated. "The network is calling," the stage manager continued. "They want to speak with you immediately." Lorraine closed her eyes. "Tell them I'm busy." "I don't think that's an option." The commercial break continued, but behind the scenes, chaos had erupted. Helen Mirren was being escorted out of the building by concerned staff members, all of whom were apologizing profusely. Marcus and Sandra had found her in the hallway, and the three of them stood together, a united front against what they had just experienced. Back on the set, Lorraine finally sat down in her chair. Her shoulders slumped. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The makeup artist approached to touch up her appearance before the show came back on air, but Lorraine waved her away. "Just leave me alone," she muttered. "Everyone just leave me alone." The floor director counted down. Back in 10, 9, 8. Lorraine straightened up, trying to compose herself. She fixed her hair, adjusted her jacket, and attempted to put on a smile. But it looked forced, artificial, nothing like the warm, welcoming expression she usually wore. 3, 2, 1. The camera lights came back on. Lorraine looked directly into the lens. "Welcome back," she said, her voice hollow. "As you saw before the break, we had a bit of an unexpected situation. Helen Mirren decided she would rather not continue our conversation." She paused, clearly trying to frame the narrative in her favor. Sometimes in this business, when you ask the hard questions, people don't like it. They prefer softball interviews, where everyone just agrees and nothing interesting gets said. But that's not what we do here. We push boundaries. We challenge our guests. The few audience members who remained were silent. No applause, no agreement, nothing. Lorraine continued, her voice becoming more defensive. "Now, I know some of you might think I was too harsh, but let me ask you this. When did we all become so fragile? When did honest conversation become offensive? I was simply pointing out realities of the entertainment industry. Age is a factor. That's not controversial. That's just fact." Still, the audience gave her nothing. The silence was deafening. "And for my panel to walk off like that," Lorraine went on, her anger creeping back in, "that was unprofessional, disloyal. In all my years doing this show, I have never been treated with such disrespect." A voice from the remaining audience members spoke up. "Maybe they were treating you the same way you treated Dame Helen." Lorraine's head snapped toward the voice. "That's different. I'm the host. It's my job to ask tough questions." "There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks," another audience member said. Lorraine looked flustered, unprepared for the audience to turn on her so openly. I think some of you are misunderstanding what journalism is, what real, hard-hitting television looks like." "That wasn't journalism," someone else called out. "That was bullying." The word hung in the air like a verdict. Bullying. That's what it had been, and now even Lorraine's own audience was saying it out loud. Lorraine stood up again, her composure cracking. "How dare you come into my studio and accuse me of bullying? You don't know anything about the pressures of live television. The need to create compelling content. The expectations. You could have created compelling content by actually discussing her work, a woman said. Instead, you made it personal. Lorraine's face was bright red now, her hands trembling. I don't have to stand here and be lectured by my own audience. If you don't like how I conduct my show, there's the door. Feel free to use it, just like everyone else apparently. Several more audience members stood up and began walking out. The exodus continued, and Lorraine watched in horror as her studio emptied further. "Fine!" she shouted. "Leave! All of you! I don't need you! I don't need any of you!" But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the panic she was trying to hide. The floor director made a cutting motion across his throat, signaling to end the segment. "We're going to another break," he called out. "No!" Lorraine shouted. "We're not going to break. We're finishing this show." But the cameras were already cutting away. The producers had made the call to pull the plug on the live broadcast. The studio lights dimmed again, and Lorraine was left standing there in the semi-darkness, breathing hard, looking around at the nearly empty studio. "This is my show," she said to no one in particular. "My show." But deep down, she knew something fundamental had broken. The respect, the trust, the goodwill she had built over years had been destroyed in a matter of minutes by her own choices, her own words, her own cruelty. The remaining staff members moved around the set quietly, avoiding eye contact with her. The few audience members who hadn't left sat in uncomfortable silence, probably regretting their decision to stay. Lorraine walked off the stage slowly, her earlier energy and confidence completely drained. As she passed a monitor showing a replay of Helen's exit, she stopped and watched. There was Helen, dignified and composed, removing her microphone with such grace and walking away with her head held high. And there was Lorraine herself, red-faced and shouting, looking exactly like the person everyone was now calling a bully. She turned away from the monitor, unable to watch anymore. The truth of what she had done, how she had behaved, was becoming impossible to ignore. But instead of acknowledging it, instead of feeling remorse, she felt only anger. Anger at Helen for walking out. Anger at Marcus and Sandra for following her. Anger at the audience for turning against her. Anger at the producers for cutting the broadcast. But mostly, though she would never admit it, anger at herself. As she walked down the corridor toward her dressing room, she could hear the whispers of staff members, the murmurs of disapproval. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone had witnessed her meltdown, and everyone knew that something irreversible had occurred. She reached her dressing room and slammed the door behind her, finally alone with the consequences of her actions. Through the door, she could hear phones ringing, voices talking urgently, the machinery of crisis management kicking into gear. But in that moment, sitting in front of her mirror, Lorraine saw what everyone else had seen. Not a respected broadcaster, not a tough journalist, just someone who had let their own insecurities and cruelty destroy something that had taken years to build. And somewhere else in the building, Helen Mirren was preparing to leave, surrounded by support and respect, her dignity intact, her reputation not just undamaged, but enhanced by how she had handled an impossible situation with grace and strength. The contrast between the two women could not have been more stark. One had lost everything in a moment of cruelty. The other had walked away from disrespect and been applauded for it. The studio was silent now, empty except for crew members packing up equipment and talking in hushed tones about what they had just witnessed. The empty chairs on the set stood as monuments to a spectacular implosion, a career-defining moment that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. And all of it had happened in real time, broadcast live, impossible to take back or erase or explain away. The words had been said. The damage had been done. The audience had seen everything. What should have been a routine morning interview had become something else entirely. a cautionary tale, a moment of truth, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed.